So my name's Mike Sargent. I work for Morris Whisky. Been working on the brand now for about 7 years since its inception. It's a brand that's obviously pretty new, but it's also pretty old as well. So 1859 was when the brand was established by the Morris family in a small town in Rutherglen, Victoria, which is on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. And yeah, back in that time, it was the gold rush, early colonial years, and our founder George Francis Morris set up his own vineyard. He sold his prized horse called Fairfield, and with that money, he funded a vineyard at the Morris winery and started making wine. So this is the wine that that George started making over 165 years ago. And it turned into a bit of a dynasty because the Morris brand is recognised as probably the most awarded Australian wine brand. And it's the family is known to be one of the best fortified producers in the world. So fortifieds in terms of muscats, sherries, ports, and tokais. So all coming out of Rutherglen, Victoria. And we still actually work with the Morris family today. So the winery still exists, the family still exists. The family, sixth generation, David Morris, is working in the winery with us. And the second chapter of the story is quite cool as well, and that's where I sort of come in as well. So about 8 years ago, the brand was owned by, or the Morris wine brand was owned by Pernod. And Pernod being Pernod, probably looked at it and thought it's a bit too complex and small for us, so we'll move on. And they decided to shut the winery down and sell off all the assets. And that's where we came in and scooped it up sort of at the 11th hour. And yeah, we acquired the winery. And the cool story about it was that we went down there and had a look at the winery, said, what are we going to do with this place? And we found this amazing still. The still was from the 1930s, and the still was originally in the winery to make grape spirit that went into the fortified wine. So this really cool hybrid copper pot still was huge, but it was all in pieces and had pigeon poo and rats all over it, and it kind of didn't really look like a still at the time. So we spent about a year bringing that still back to life. And at the same time too, we found all these old barrels as well. So obviously the family's been making fortified wine for over 165 years, and they just had this amazing library or catalogue of just all these old barrels. Some of them were from the early turn of the century, still with wine in them as well. So you could imagine there was some pretty cool liquids in that shed. So we found all these barrels, and we looked around. We thought, okay, there's something. We're onto something here. So we had the still. We got the still working again, and playing around with the still and moving some plates around and things like that. And the area down Rutherglen as well is well known for barley and grain. So we started thinking about all these elements playing together, and the actual winery itself is on the banks of the Murray River. It's the largest river in Australia as well. And so we had this great water source that was flowing down from the Snowy Mountains. We had these amazing barrels, this unique 1930s copper pot still. We had our own cooper on site as well. So he was quite integral in helping us prepare the barrels. So all the barrels that we had would come from the winery. We'd make this unique spirit, this unique single malt in our own still, and then finish off. And once they've aged, finish off in these really cool fortified barrels and these ancient casks that have these flavors that are just amazing. So yeah, so I came into it and sort of worked with our head distiller. His name's Darren Peck, and he's actually really got a wealth of experience. He's an ex-brewer actually, and most good distillers are ex-brewers, so they know what goes into the whiskey. And we worked with a number of different gentlemen, a gentleman called Jim Swan. So he was the guy who set up Cavalan Distillery. They called him the Einstein of whiskey at the time, because he really knew a lot about wood and what wood does when you're aging in such hot climates like Australia. So he helped us out. And another guy called John McDougall. So he'd been head distiller at Balvenie, Lafroig, all over Scotland, all the big brands. So had a bit of a crack team there. We were sort of working on how to bring all this together. And my role was really to update all the packaging and really make sure that the brand was really in step with the legacy of the Morris family. So probably one of the biggest challenges we had was trying to pry some of these barrels off the Morris family. So they obviously loved their wine, and these prized barrels were amazing that they were aging, but we also wanted to borrow a few to finish some of our whiskies. So this one here is our muscat finish cask. So about a 5-year-old whiskey. As I said, we've been sort of laying down liquids since about 2017. But the best thing about this is obviously it's all made on site and follows all the principles of a single malt. But we get to finish our muscat whiskey in 20-year-old muscat casks. So these things are like Christmas cake. Some of the flavors that you get, some of this cask. And for me, it's just a great story to be able to tell, because not many other distilleries in the world can actually say that they source all their own barrels from the same winery and all their finishing casks from the same winery. It's we've got this absolute sort of gift that we're being given by the Morris family, and it's just it's so cool that to think that this could have actually been sold off or just died, and we've been able to reinvigorate the brand, but in a way that reinvents it as well. So ever since we took over the winery, the wine's actually been selling really well, and it's great because not only we've been selling the wine to people who love fortified wine, we're introducing it to whiskey drinkers as well, and some who have never even knew what a fortified wine was. And likewise, we've been selling our whiskey and introducing that to wine drinkers as well, who probably wouldn't have picked up a glass of single malt. So it's a beautiful story to be able to reinvigorate a dying category. And when we do whiskey shows or tastings, to see people drink a 20-year-old muscat for the first time, it's pretty amazing. That their sort of minds get blown. It's kind of like drinking I'd say a Christmas cake or liquid gold, they usually explain. So it's a great story. It's we've got a great legacy, and there's not many other brands in Australia that are over 165 years of age. So we've got a really good story, and the beautiful thing for me is that we still get to work with the Morris family. And it's even though the whiskey is still young, the history and the family legacy and some of the liquids that we use to finish the whiskey in almost are ancient in terms of Australian years, in terms of manufacturing drinks and wine and whiskey. So it's such a great brand to be involved with. And it's we're in about 6 different countries now and doing really well in Australia. So we're just really excited to be part of it. So we have a few whiskies. We have an entry level, which we call our signature range, and we really tried to make sure that one was quite approachable. We modelled it off, say, a Speyside whiskey, so very quite light, biscuity, and obviously with the finishing cask of muscat slightly sweeter. But in particular, this is our hero product, which is the muscat, and it's for a 5-year-old whiskey. It gets a lot of flavour and colour. You can see the colour from the whiskey, all from the wine casks. And I'd probably describe the flavour as complex and sort of old beyond its years, because what the muscat does, these older materials, it just brings a lot of depth and complexity to the flavour. And as I mentioned, with this one, I get Christmas cake. It's not too sweet. You get some fortified finished whiskies that almost taste like the wine. They've been kept in the cask too long. Whereas we really want to make sure that, first and foremost, this is a real whiskey with hints of fortified flavours. But at the end of the day, it's a great solid whiskey. And as I said, you can't really get away from that Christmas cake flavour, baked spices. I get a bit of white chocolate on there as well. And it's absolutely delicious. The sort of dried fruit flavours. So this is probably one of my favourites, and it's just a great one to finish off the night on. We really took a lot of care with designing, and we also updated the packaging for the wine as well as the whiskey at the time, because it was quite dated. I think the previous packaging update was early 90s, and you could just imagine it probably wasn't the prettiest. It was probably done in clip art, I think, at the time. But this one, we really wanted to make sure that it stood for the legacy of the Morris family. And you can see this little cool horse, if you can make that out, and it's sort of embossed in the bottle as well. And the horse, as I mentioned earlier, was a horse called Fairfield. It was a steeplechase horse, and George really needed to fund the winery, so he actually sold it. You know, he obviously didn't regret it in the end, but he begrudgingly sold it. And so it was Fairfield the horse that is what made our winery and also the whiskey. So he's very proud and loud on the logo. The Morris family type, we looked back at all the old labels from, you know, the early part of the century, and we resurrected the old sort of typeface and fonts from the labels. And the rest of the time we really tried to really make it sure it looks elegant. We obviously borrowed from cues from Scotland and made sure that, you know, that we look like a serious whiskey. It wasn't a flash in the pan or something that, you know, that might just pop up in someone's garage in an industrial estate. It had a lot of substance and a lot of history. And for us, the sort of emblem around the fortified barrels, we really talk about our barrels because that's our defining sort of point of difference and unique selling point to any other whiskey in the world, to say that we can actually talk to our own barrels that sort of impart those flavors and those beautiful sort of textures into the whiskey. There's a lot of new world whiskies coming, and I think in Australia itself, Australia's got a really healthy local craft scene. We've only been making whiskies since the early 90s, so we're probably a long way behind the Scottish there, and even the Americans, obviously, with their bourbon. But I think it was really Japan that kind of put world whiskies on the map, and I think ever since, I think there's been a lot of different distilleries popping up at some really unique locations, and probably one of the most interesting things is the environments. So I know in Australia we have quite different temperatures and fluctuations of temperatures than Scotland. So our products age differently. We also have different materials as well. And we have access to red wine barrels. We have, as I said, high fluctuations in temperature. So we have a lot of different factors that go into actually creating quite a unique spirit. So the temperatures actually allow the liquid to absorb into the wood and actually age the liquid a lot quicker than when Scotch. So these are some of the differences that you see in a lot of different world whiskies. But yeah, look, there's a lot of whiskies coming out. There's New Zealand, there's Israel, there's Taiwan, and I think each market has their own terroir and their own conditions. So you're going to get a lot of different variations. Some of them probably good, some of them bad. I don't know, but I think you truly master the whiskey when you actually really understand the conditions that you're creating it in, and that's something we take really serious. So yeah, Rutherglen is world renowned as the fortified capital of Australia. So Muscat is a signature fortified wine that comes from the region, and conditions are really quite unique for winemaking, particularly for fortified wines. Probably the most prominent is that the really high temperatures. I've been down there in summer, and it can be like 45, 48 degrees in the middle of summer, and I've been down there in winter as well. I've forgot my jacket and it's sub-zero temperatures. So you have this real variation in seasons. So once again, for fortified wines, the heat is really amazing for creation of those grapes. The winemakers let the grapes dry out on the vine to get those really intense flavors before they harvest. So not only seasonal differences, we have very high diurnal fluctuations. So that's day and night. It gets cold at night, hot in the day. So as I said, for whiskey aging, it's perfect because it's really opening up the wood both during the season and during, even 24 hours, allowing the whiskey to age a lot more. And I mean, apart from that, we have the amazing Murray River that flows straight through the town. You can see it from the winery. So that's all water sourced from the Snowy Mountains. And all around, it's known as the grain belt as well. So we have a lot of access to local grains, including barley. And we're fortunate enough to have our own small brewery as well. So we get to harvest local barley. The couple of grains that we have is Westminster and Gardner grains. So we make a little bit of beer on the side, but the majority of those grains go into making the whiskey as well. Probably one of our biggest concerns when we were starting the whiskey was that people were going to look at us and say, hey, you're a winemaker, what are you doing with whiskey? And so we really tried to keep those two sides of the business separate. But the more we tried to keep them separate, they actually more logical it felt to bring them back together. We make the whiskey in an old ex-wine still, or ex-spirit still that goes into wine. We age it in wine barrels. We finish it in fortified barrels. We still work closely with a family. We're in a wine country. So for us, the story makes a lot more sense together. And as I mentioned, the more we spoke to diehard wine enthusiasts, they actually thought it was a really cool way to reinvent a brand that was probably destined to sort of fade away. And from whiskey drinkers, they're discovering these ancient craft of fortified wines that they'd never even seen before. So the more we actually talked about the wine, the more people leaned in and were interested. So we felt it's a strength of us. So it turned into something we weren't really keen to talk about originally, but we've embraced it. And I think, the people who try both the wine and the whiskey kind of really love that story as well. Yeah, Morris it's a funny one. We get asked a lot about what crazy new ideas you've got for new whiskies. And for me, we'll probably really stick to what the core proposition of Morris is, and that is fortified wine. So we will look at different grain styles that we're growing in our local area, so rye and even Australian natural grains. But Morris is famous for muscat, Tokay, sherry and port. So really that's our core offer. But really from the cool things that we do have access to is some of these barrels, and I've got my eye on a few barrels that are over 100 years of age, and I want to actually use those with some aged whiskey to make some really special single barrel, limited edition, high proof versions that we want to sort of share with the world as well. So we've actually just got so many barrels in different flavors from different vintages throughout the years that we've got almost endless source of ideas. It's just about making sure that whatever we bring out is true to the Morris sort of legacy, the high standard of quality that that we hold ourselves to, and at that signature style, at that fortified finish. And yeah, look, that's something that we're only 7 years into whiskey making, so we're still trying to find our feet, but we're very clear around the level of quality and the level of complexity that we want our whiskies to show.